BlenderNest, your neighborhood dive bar?
Dive bar? Okay.
What? Maybe?
There was this bar in New York City on the Lower East Side, and it was like right across the street. I remember exactly because I could find it because it was like right across the street from a matzah factory, and it was called the Johnsons, and it was just it had like the most comfortable couch in the world, and it was just set up like a living room, and they had like $2 Pabst Blue Ribbon all the time. It was just the coolest dive bar ever, and it was just so much fun. I don't know if it's still there, but it was awesome.
You inspired me to look up this bar that I went to with my friend Luke a couple of years ago in Brooklyn, and I can't remember the name, but they had, the whole thing is like whiskey, right? And that's great, but I don't drink very much. But they had these incredible grilled cheese sandwiches, like of all kinds, like just different concoctions that they would throw on there. Am I sideways?
Yes, you
Yeah,
are.
you're sideways.
What? Okay.
That's hilarious. You should do the
why
whole
did this
podcast that
happen?
way.
Okay, yeah, why not? I kind of feel looking at myself like I'm falling. Anyway, whiskey bar with incredible grilled cheeses, and my friend spent like a reasonable amount on this really fine whiskey, and I spent just as much, if not more, on grilled cheeses. Like I must have had maybe 5 or 6 very expensive grilled cheese sandwiches because they were just so good, and I've never had that grilled cheese experience again. So
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
yes.
Oh, yay.
So, down to business. So, Cryptoart.
Oh boy.
I don't know if we actually want to get into it. Yeah.
I'm always down to get into it, but I'd rather not be sideways the whole time.
Yeah, what's
Yeah.
happening there?
Your fashion, and I would love to do a shirt collab.
Oh my god. Yes. I've had lots of mixed opinions
like your shirts too.
about this. I've had comments from people saying, "Hey, you should definitely buy some more shirts," and I'm like, "Hey, that's not nice. Come on." I like my
That's
floral
not the
shirts.
topic of this video.
Yeah, exactly.
Like maybe sign up for my Patreon, and I will.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I did that to someone once, and they said, "Oh, you begging for people to sign up is really a bad image." I was like, "All right, dude, whatever." Like maybe pay for the Patreon, and I won't need to beg, you know.
I've been firing back at trolls. It's been so much fun.
Oh, one of my haters came back a couple of days ago. I was happy about that, so I sent them a nice message saying, "Where have you been? It's been so long." I think they made a cameo in the hate comment video. So yeah, they're
Nice.
famous.
Maybe that inspired their return.
Yeah, maybe they want to try and get in again.
I'm gonna leave and come back to see if I can be right side up because this is annoying.
So Blender, Blender related.
Blender, yes.
I did the live stream. Was it yesterday or was it the day before?
It was good.
That was fun. It was very impromptu. I think like about half an hour earlier I decided, hey, let's do one, because people in my server had been pestering me to do one for ages, and I said, I'll do it when there's time to like pre-announce it, and I was like, no, let's do it now, right now. Yeah, it was fun. Just a general portfolio review, and then a little bit of NFT chat, and then some general discussion at the end. But I didn't want to get too far into the NFTs because I am still kind of terrified about talking about it on the channel. It still hasn't gone away on Twitter, certainly, all the animosity.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
just
think
weird.
it will go away.
It's increased.
But it's in some ways exciting because that just means that people are either learning about what the blockchain is or what NFTs are for the first time,
Yeah.
or about cryptocurrency, or really diving in deep to do some research on what it means, not just for the environment, which is a huge, obviously, point of discussion and conversation, and a very valid one at that, but at the same time, what it means for the way that we move forward with our current financial systems, our current ways of transacting and doing things. And yeah, something that's exciting to me, I think I've mentioned here before, definitely mentioned online, is the idea of smart contracts that are built on top of Ethereum, Cardano, these other blockchains and networks. Just because it sounds cool is one of the big reasons, smart contracts, and obviously for what they actually are and the value that they can bring. So I welcome all discussion in the comments below, and we did have some in the previous video. If you haven't seen it, BlenderNest 42, I think we titled it "We're Going to Get Canceled." We have not been canceled. If anything, we've just like welcomed open discussion about this because it is a very, I don't want to say contentious because then I feel like that kind of puts a negative connotation on it, but it is a very it's a very important topic to discuss, right? Like how we consume and what kind of systems we buy into. So if you have questions, just ping us. We're happy to chat about it.
I made a Twitter post as well. I think maybe 1 or 2 days before that live stream as well, just asking people to share their favorite artists. No, actually no, there was one before that as well, which was I made a bit of a kind of, I don't want to say sarcastic. It wasn't really. It was the are there any virtue signaling awards for those of us that don't want to lose friends over Cryptoart? I was like, okay, well that'll just be a quick one that goes and disappears on the Twitter feed. But no, like an argument started in that thread, and I was like, oh no.
Whoa.
Like I summoned
I saw that.
It was bound to happen.
I mean, it will come, and I think it's valid.
And for the tweet after that, which was asking people to share their favorite artists, it was literally like, share your favorite artists, not share yourself. And all of a sudden, I got like tweet after tweet of people sharing their own NFT arts. And I was like, first of all, I didn't even say NFT. I didn't even say Cryptoart in the tweet. And it's your favorite artist, not yourself. So I don't know what happened, but that summoned like a bunch of people. And I was like, oh God, you cannot escape it.
I just wonder if it's a bubble. Like you had mentioned, I mean, you had mentioned in our chat that it was, you liken it to the .com. And I'm seeing a lot of parallels to it.
Yeah, I think in some ways it is kind of like the .com boom, where a lot of people are sort of pushing to get into the space right now. But one of the things that I've been saying is that I'm more excited about the future and what's to come, or what could be possible if we continue sort of putting attention and work and effort and a lot of thought and dedication into these spaces, because it's not, and we've said this here before and said it in private and just in conversations and discussions, it's not about the art specifically, unfortunately, right? From some avenues and from some context. But what the huge takeaway here is what these transactions with cryptocurrency, what the idea of like the crypto space, what the validity of somebody's the lifetime of work is going to be like down the line. And so I would be cautious to not shoot ourselves as a community, as a society in the foot by sort of talking down the idea of or flaming people taking part in crypto art or in these spaces, and kind of take a more holistic stance on it and see what we can extract from this to add value to our current systems and make sure that we don't ruin the planet and society while we're doing that.
Very true.
I think that just boils it all down to an ethos and people, something people can understand.
It's complex because we have, something we've talked about briefly is proof of work versus proof of stake, what those mean, and sort of how those two bring some benefits to the table while also having their own detriments. And this is going to be true for anything in any space, but right now, obviously, with all this money that's being thrown around for artists and with artists and by artists, which is another important part of the conversation, it's gotten a lot of attention. Like, to me, it's really exciting and really valuable to see artists, like a 17-year-old kid who's been doing digital art for a while, ever since they've got their hands on a computer, making a bunch of money, and the first thing that they want to do with that money is actually create a grant for other artists to be able to also take part in this conversation and bring them to the limelight. So just in the same way that it's not necessarily about the art, it's also not necessarily about the money, and I think that's an important thing to think about. We should maybe navigate away from crypto art a little bit and gear it back more towards BlenderNest.
I've been thinking a lot about like bridging the gap between physical galleries and digital galleries. And we all, in some ways, upkeep our own digital galleries, whether that be Instagram, Sketchfab, or etc., ArtStation. And like, if you could display your art in any form, what form would that take?
For me, 90% of the stuff, I don't know, almost 100% of the stuff I do is production art. So I'm not really like, I never saw myself as like an artist. Like, my art serves markets. Most of my career has been using art to basically take concepts and ideas and get them funded for really cool things. Music has always been more of my art, I guess. But in photography, I've been also like really into photography, and I do some artistic looking photography stuff too. And I should do artistic 3D stuff, but I just I'm so production focused because that's my career. So I don't know. Like I'd say for me, something that helps the world, stuff that helps the world. If my efforts can go into helping cure disease or helping cure poverty or whatever, then that's the space for my personal art.
I've always been interested in the idea of turning some of the artwork into like 3D physical things. I know that there are artists that sell like miniatures or 3D prints of things they've made, but it's not really easy to get that done. I think a lot of people use like other companies for it. Some of the most fun I had making art was doing these weird kind of expressionist sculpt type things, and I kind of miss doing that. Maybe I should go back to doing it for the channel. But those are the kinds of things I would like to have kind of like as busts, like in the 3D space. Because then I like the idea of making products for people, like physical things, and just like, packaging it all up and sending that off to someone. So I feel like actually stepping from digital to physical is something that I'd quite like to do in the future. If you could make as much money doing that as you could with, regular crypto art, then I think that would be cool.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Kev's comment. You said that like you don't like think of the stuff that you make in 3D as art necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading this psychology book right now. In psychology, there's like 2 sets of skills for a happy life. One set of skills is instrumental skill set, and the other set is expressive skill set. And as I'm reading this book, I'm also, have our throw in Clubhouse in the background. So I'm thinking about NFTs and art. And how a question that's come up a lot is like, what is art? What are the moments when you're like using Blender where you feel like you're not using your instrumental skills, but you're using your expressive skills? So I think that's an interesting question because it helps identify these moments of creativity within very technical structures, which can help us or help me or help people who are looking to develop their art, like pinpoint those moments and try to recreate those moments as much as possible.
Jumping into a project from the start is always probably the most expressive because you get to storyboard, you get to craft, you get to do your look development. I think look dev is probably one of the most interesting parts because you're really like you're fleshing out the emotions and the look of what you're doing and how you're going to convey that to the audience to get the specific reaction that you're looking for, right? So when you're jumping into a project and everybody's talking about it, you have a chance to be really expressive. You have a chance to inject looks and emotion and things in color spaces and composition and a whole bunch of things that you normally do as an artist, right? This is you're using the skill set, so it's strategic, and in the strategic section you can be expressive, whereas the tactical section would be more of the instrumental, hands-on, rote production of it. So when you're strategic, you're more expressive, I think, and when you're tactical, you're in the zone. But it's you're taking from the strategic part, the expressive part, and you're actually executing on it. Does that make sense? So for me, I think that the planning part is probably the most expressive.
That to me sounds really awesome because you summed it up towards the end, but the strategic part where you actually implement, okay, how are we going to go about doing this and what are we doing, is the part where you find, or at least I'm understanding, is where you find to be the creative moments, and then it's kind of like a muscle memory thing that maybe goes on there on out because you already have this sort of very decomposed or broken down set of things that you are going to tackle. That's awesome.
When a project comes in, there's always the strategy part, right? There's the strategy session. It's when you figure out what what the story is. So clients will come and they'll have something that they want to get funded, or that they want to sell, or something, and you kind of figure out, okay, what's your story? Why does this exist? Strategy is always where you're the big picture, the planning, and tactics is the actual doing of it. So I find that the most expressive, when you can be the most expressive, is, for me, is in the strategy session. It's when you're trying to figure out how you're going to create the pieces of art or the animation that's best going to convey the message and the story that you're aiming for. So that's when you get to do all the cool look dev stuff, when you get to do the composition, when you get to figure out what's going to be in the frame, animation timing, pausing, all that stuff. When you're figuring out what the tactics are going to be, but you still have this big picture, creative, strategic aim. And you can be creative too when you're executing, but it's more tactical. That's the tactical stuff. So that's when you're actually like cooking, right? That you're not like being creative necessarily when you're cooking a meal. You've already done that when you've been prepping and doing the recipe and all that, right? You go into that tunnel where you're just kind of creating. You're in the zone, right? So it feels good. You're kind of in that, to take the binaural aspect that you were talking about, your hemispheres are aligned and you're just in the zone, and you're in that Zen moment where you're creating, right? And that's what we all love as artists, is that zone where time disappears and you're just there focused, right? And then at the end, you come out of that tunnel, which is the tactical, and you get to enjoy it. And then again, you get to step back into the strategic and look and say, does that work, right? Yeah. And then you can be creative again by like throwing darts at the stuff. So there's always kind of that like big organic mix of creating as an artist that would tie into those two skill sets that you had mentioned. At least my cursory understanding of the two skill sets that you mentioned, because I didn't read the book, but if I had to tie it to strategy versus tactics, for me, I get to be more creative at the strategy level.
That is interesting. And I suppose it also depends on the scope a lot, because as you say, it's much easier to be creative from a strategic level. We can kind of see things more abstractly. But I suppose it also depends on the skill set and whether you're following through on planning or improvisation. Because it's very difficult to be creative when you're coding specific tasks, but it's much more easy to be creative when you're like sculpting something. But then again, sculpting itself is still like more abstract than manually placing vertices. So I suppose depending on the skill set, you can be like creative or expressive at different levels, which is an interesting thing to think about.
You hit a word right there that throws the wrench into what I was saying too, and that's improvisation. And improvisation is when you're in that tunnel, right? You're in the tactical zone, but you're pulling from the strategy, and you're using that to improvise as you're going along. So that's kind of that can pull the creative and the expressive into the tactical tunnel that you're in when you're actually creating, right? Yeah. So improvisation is that a god in the machine. It's a deus ex machina that comes into your tactical space that you can pull from and use that to improvise, and then you're being creative and expressive in the tactical. Yeah. So yes, that's a good point you made.
I like that analogy. I improvise like most of my artwork, and I've heard like mixed opinions from people about it. Like, oh, you shouldn't improvise, you should always work from references. But I think they're two different but still connected skill sets. Like being able to improvise something and being able to like make something from reference or from plan. But as you're kind of saying, like when I go into making artwork, I kind of have like a feeling or like a very blurry idea of what I want to do. And then I'll start making it. But as you're making it, you're creating more information that you can use as inspiration to direct the idea. So you'll find yourself trying things and then going in a slightly different direction as well.
Yep.
So, finding those pockets is where one 10-minute thing becomes an hour-long piece of work. And it's really exciting. Like I know in the context of improvisation and the stuff that you are all talking about, I don't want to throw you under the bus, or not throw you on the bus, put you on the spot, Ellie, but I know that you just finished rereading Flow, and so this, what we're talking about here kind of gets me thinking about the importance of being able to sort of step outside of yourself and identify the moments into which you can sort of craft some time for being in this flow state where you can work in things methodically, but kind of get lost in it at the same time. And I think that's a really important skill to hone, especially if you're just in general, really, not especially for something.
You're reading the book Flow? That's where you're getting this from?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great, because I had always meant to pick up that book, and it's always been on the back burner, and I always forget about it, and now I'm remembering again. So thanks for that. I'm totally like, okay, now I get it.
Do it.
Okay. Yep. I was picturing like the blue cover and the word, and oh yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. It took me a while to get through. It's a bit old. It was published in the 90s.
Yep.
So there's some outdated concepts in there.
I was published in the 90s.
You were what?
I was published in the 90s. 94.
You were published.
Yeah.
I was published in the 70s.
94. I was 96.
I'm Gen X. I'm a Gen X slacker though. I'm pretty close to millennial. I'm on the cusp.
Speaking of like envisioning versus execution, I feel like I've been seeing so many amazing like procedural posts from Aaron and Charan and the whole crew over at Arendale's Discord, and it just seems like proceduralism and like parametric thinking seems like a more efficient way to execute your vision. Like sometimes I'm over in the layout viewport, like tab, moving shapes around. And moving shapes in digital space is a lot easier than moving shapes in real space. But like if I'm doing something that has a lot of iterations, you can use the array modifier, or you could do it procedurally, and you would have a lot more flexibility after the fact, after the creation. But I am still learning how to use nodes correctly, and so sort of the learning curve is very steep. And from the standpoint of starting to create the artwork I'm envisioning from right now, doing it procedurally would take longer, and I would be in the weeds of learning new things instead of actually building toward the artwork. But in the long run, it seems like it would be a lot more efficient. And so I feel torn often from that space. I also feel the same way about coding and like creating artwork through code, and learning Python and Blender, because ultimately code is a layer deeper than proceduralism.
I remember Aaron, actually, I think he summed it up nicely in one of the episodes. And I think I might have used my space station generator as an example. But it's like, you can spend a while making something pristine in the way you want it, or you can invest a lot more time building a system that does it for you. You'll no doubt feel kind of insecure during the process about thinking whether or not it's a good time investment. But then at the end of it, you've got something that will satisfy your needs, and depending on if you've designed it in a smart way, it could be adapted for more tools in the future. So I think when people build procedural systems, they have like a use case and a target in mind, which is the best way to achieve that. But if you're smart about how you build it, you can make it adaptable for more things, which I think is the best way to do it. Because some people take a lot of shortcuts when designing systems just to get it to do that one specific thing, which makes sense if you're on a time budget, but not necessarily if you wanted to, I guess, maximize the usefulness of it in its long term. But learning about proceduralism and coding to speed up workflows is definitely a worthwhile skill investment, I suppose. And proceduralism for artwork is interesting because I think the term sometimes has a bit of a bad connotation depending on kind of what industry you're coming from. Because in video games, procedural generation is a bit controversial because, like, I think for a lot of people it means, boring, repetitive, same thing over and over and over again. I'm thinking like specifically of, say, space exploration games like No Man's Sky, which I really like, but there comes a point where you've seen like everything generally that it can make, and I don't think that procedural technology or systems necessarily create repetitive things. I think it's a failure of like the artistic intent behind it. Because for things like video games like that, they're using a lot of pre-made assets to like populate the environments, and there's only so many assets that the artists in a development team can make, before we're kind of hitting the limits of like recognition. Players play these games for thousands of hours. Of course, they're going to see everything that someone can make. But if you're working on enough detail, so like they'd say, okay, here's a creature or the leg of a creature that I've made. Well, if you want to do something that's really non-repetitive, you've got to go in even closer. Something that's beyond the immediate perception of what a human would recognize. And then as well as that, you've got to have clever rules for being able to disrupt the flow of recognition. And I suppose that's exactly what seamless textures do. When you look at textures that are scattered along, you see the kind of weird outlines or patterns that repeat, making them seamless. We know it's the same texture over and over again, but you're disrupting the identifiable parts of the data that we would recognize as a pattern. And I think that clever procedural systems do that with 3D things. So I think there's still so much potential to explore there, especially for generative modeling, which I'm sure that people will create lots of fancy demos for when geometry nodes gets a bit more fleshed out. And I'd be very interested in that.
I think we're on the cusp. And I think that's a really good question you have, Ellie, is that, and especially coming from, the angle that you're coming from, it's apropos to anybody listening to this right now, because we're on the cusp, right? Blender is going procedural. It's going in that direction. All right. Whether it's following Houdini or its own path, it's going in that. The Cinema 4D has it too, and so did XSI 10 years ago, soft homage. But there are like a few different kinds of artists. There are the artists that just want to go and throw paint on a canvas, right? And then there are the technical artists that want to use technology and leverage technology into their art. And proceduralism allows you to leverage the technology into your art, but it's the learning curve, like you said, is insanely steep for procedural. Going from like a right brain art mind and using the left side, left hemisphere stuff with the math and the logic and all that into procedural, is bridging the gap. And for me, learning Houdini was going from Maya, which is not very procedural. I mean, you could kind of use it procedurally, but not even close to what you do in Houdini. It's a different workflow. And trying to figure out why I'm taking so long on the front end with every project to build a system that I could have had finished already in Maya, in 15 minutes. Why am I taking 3 hours to do this in Houdini? And then I quickly realized later on, when all the changes came back, from the client and all the requests, that it's so awesome to have that procedural system built, because at that point I can just plug something into the top of the chain, have it propagate, and there's the change, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas Maya, I would have to go, and even if it was 15 minutes, that's another 15 minutes I have to do, whereas the computer did it in 15 seconds or less, right? So it dawned on me that you don't have to be procedural, and I think that's going to be going forward. I think that's a good message that I'd like to put out there to the entire community, is that there's going to be a whole push for this procedural thing. Blender nodes is coming. You're seeing it all over YouTube. People are doing videos on it. I mean, geometry nodes. Sorry, geometry nodes are coming, right? And it's going to be this huge push, like crypto. It's this huge push, right? And I think people are going to start getting the fear of missing out. Oh, I have to learn this, and then they're gonna go into geometry nodes and they're gonna be like, I don't get it. Because as an artist, like, you're not going to get it right away. I don't know how many of us actually do get it right away. It's not something as an artist that you're going to get right away. If you do, consider yourself lucky. That's great. Go with it, right? But like, don't feel as artists that you have to go into the procedural realm. It's a tool set. Proceduralism is a tool set. It's a tool set, like Curtis said, which is spot on, that you can build systems to do the art for you. So like, if you're a guy like Skinner, I don't know if you guys know him on he's on Instagram. He creates these like cool monsters, like really cool, trippy, like amazing artwork. I personally love his stuff. I'm a fan. But if he were to proceduralize that stuff, he could knock out his style. he could create a system that builds stuff in his style and like knock that out, knock out like piece after piece after piece, and then just go back and like tweak it how he wants, right? So for that, artistically, you could use proceduralism for that sort of thing. Or as a production artist in video games, like Curtis was saying, you could build systems that push massive amounts of data out and populate an entire game world. And then you can go in and you can build in stuff into that system so you can do the pattern interrupt stuff, right? So you don't have to have the same patterns all over the place. You can build that in. But if you just want to create, right? And this goes back also to the strategic versus tactical, right? I see proceduralism as tactical and strategic as like building, crafting the system itself. And you can be creative in crafting the procedural system, but you don't have to. Like sculpting is something that I don't see going completely procedural, right? Sculpting is always going to be kind of hands-on, right? You're in there, you're sculpting, you're moving the brush around, you're crafting, you're pushing, you're pulling, you're cutting, you're flattening, you're scraping, all that, right? That's not necessarily procedural stuff. So you can still be an artist, and you're not going to have to actually go and think that you're missing out because you're not taking advantage of geometry nodes. Like there's still a space for very artistic art that doesn't touch the systems in the procedural area, if that makes sense. It's kind of like the 30,000 foot view here, but like don't feel pressured that all this procedural stuff is coming, and if you don't get it, you're stupid and just throw Blender away. Like it's not that. There are technical artists out there who will be using procedural systems, and there are sculptors and painters and texture artists and stuff that are still going to be using, the very tactical, hands-on, inspirational muse type stuff. You can build, you can do both, but don't think that you're gonna miss out, or that you suck because you don't get proceduralism. It's not something you get right away.
Kind of repeating something we already touched on briefly, like it's important to understand these things and to step outside of yourself and recognize them, because if you tackle it from should I add this? Do I have the bandwidth right now in my current projects, or what I want to do to add this tool to my tool set? You're going to save yourself a lot of heartache and a lot of headache as well.
You will.
Down the line. It's not to say one is necessarily better than the other. They both have their use cases. Like I was working on a project that I shared with you all briefly, where I wanted to put a bunch of sunflowers up on this field, and I was using the inbuilt scatter objects tool in Blender to do that, and they were all rotating kind of weird, and it wasn't really what I wanted, and they were not the exact sizes. And so for something like that, maybe placing them manually is a better tool, or diving in and actually learning how to do it with geometry nodes, right? So it really just depends about it's really just about the bandwidth that you have to learn something, as well as whether or not you recognize the different use cases that tool will bring you and how they fit in.
It should be said as well that proceduralism procedural is a pretty stupid word, because from a kind of philosophical standpoint, everything is procedural. Like when you're using Blender and you're modeling stuff and you're extruding a face, you think, okay, well, this is like the lowest possible thing I can do. I'm just extruding a face. That's a procedural operation because it's following a procedure.
Yeah.
You're doing multiple things at once, because if you've got like a quad, you're extruding it. By moving your mouse, you are basically initiating the creation of 4 vertices and moving their location. So there's a layer going on there. Everywhere you look, there's always layers going on, and that's procedural if it's following a procedure.
It's cool if you learn proceduralism as you're learning 3D, right? Because to learn Houdini, for example, because Houdini is like the most procedural, it's built procedurally, right? So if you're going to learn that, like learn how 3D works from the start. A lot of artists don't want to do that. They want to just jump in and start creating stuff because we're creative, right? We don't want to learn like the molecular structure of clay. Like we don't really need to know what molecules and what elements create clay. We just need to know how to like throw it down and hammer it down and start working with it, right? Proceduralism is learning what molecules and what elements are inside that clay and how best to use that and go on basically on a molecular level and reconstruct it. And that's kind of like the core. So Houdini kind of pushes you into that. How do you go in and, start working with the elements to build out the clay? Because with elements, you can build any kind of clay you want, right? But not everybody wants to do that, right? So the message that we're kind of putting out here is that it's coming, but you don't necessarily have to do that to be a 3D artist. You don't. And there's a really good video, actually, I just thought of it, a really good video on Side Effects website where they talk about using Houdini in the movie Midway, which is, I think, that World War II Pacific Theater, operation.
Mm-hmm.
And they were saying how the Houdini artists would build these tools, and then through Houdini engine ported it into Maya, and the artists would take those tools. So they would take like the explosion tools that were built in Houdini, and they could use them and not have to get into the nitty gritty of proceduralism, but they could use them creatively and put the explosions and the fire wherever they wanted.
Yeah.
Right. So there's always like room for that where you don't necessarily have to do the procedural stuff. You can be an artist. And then once you're comfortable just, using 3D art, you're using 3D applications creatively, then you can go into the procedural and start tying that in if you want to. It's your choice. Those kind of projects are really heavy on the front end because you're building the systems to do the stuff that you want. So most of your time is spent on the front end, whereas when you use Maya, like you use, when you use Blender, like, I'm getting confused. You use Blender like you use Maya, or you use 3D Studio Max. You just jump in and do your creative stuff, and then worry about like fixing things later. So it's always just it's a workflow preference, I'll say. And
Definitely.
it doesn't mean that you're going to miss out because you're not jumping into proceduralism and geometry nodes and all that stuff. Like, don't worry about that. And certainly don't give up, because you see everybody talking about something that you may not understand right away. It's not going to stop you from being a 3D artist or learning Blender. Like, you will pick up the procedural stuff later on. It's a natural flow of learning to working with 3D software. Or if you're a programmer who wants to be creative, yeah, like proceduralism is perfect for you because that's your mind's already thinking that way. So go in and do the stuff programmatically and generate your art programmatically. Then it helps you. So it's great on both ends, from the artistic point and from the program point, and you all meet in the middle and just create cool stuff.
We had a very interesting discussion around November when it came to procedural stuff, because there was a lot of this, oh, wow, that's really impressive. You did it with code, essentially, whether it's visual scripting or actually typing in some shader code. And at the end of it, you pretty much end up with, oh, I could have done that in 5 minutes with modeling. So as you were saying earlier, there is that you're front loading your work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a lot of other things in Blender. I can see the array modifier being used less and less and less, because geometry nodes are going to give you far more levers to tweak, and it's going to be far more intuitive rather than going to the modifier stack and finding little bits and bobs and levers to pull there. And I think overall we're going to see a slight shift, but not a massive one, away from what people are currently doing. You'll find new techniques in order to produce the results that you want. And parametric modeling, whether it's using a predetermined modifier stack or whether it's using geometry nodes, it's just a different way of modeling.
Correct.
And some of it will have flexibility. So one of the in a course I did last year, one of the things we did was make a fire hydrant. But you could adjust the slider, and using drivers, you could link together the number of faces that a particular cylinder had, and therefore you can make a really low poly one, or you could crank it up and then change the number of bolts, all by changing some levers. Of course, geometry nodes has now come around. I can see that being much easier to manage and handle in geometry nodes, where you've got access to those levers all in front of you, rather than having to dive into different areas. And the same when it comes to building structures. Okay, you've got so many floors, they're going to have so many sets of windows and so many fire escapes. Before, you had to really know your way around Blender and know about linking drivers from this area to that area. And it got really muddy really quickly. You're like, oh shoot, which part of my model is controlling the height of the entire building? Because it's not a height value. It's not a height value that you just type in. It's like, oh, it's how many of this particular one element, and you might have used like a wall piece or a window piece. It's like, how many high did I have it? And it's just going through and finding which one you can control. So I think that's going to have a huge impact for certain workflows. For others, it's just going to be another tool that you probably, as a beginner, will never touch.
Yeah.
and of course the
Yeah.
mixture of workflows. That's some as humans we tend to compartmentalize things. It's this or that. It's white or black. It's red or blue. You know, pick the pill that you want to take. And it's not a case of that. You could model something normally, just through box modeling or poly modeling, and then plug it into the procedural system, and boom, you've now got 20,000 of them in your scene.
And then you crash your computer.
Yeah.
It's also worth pointing out that like the development of procedural tools opens the way for more jobs as well. I don't even know if it's necessarily a case that it would eliminate certain jobs. It might do, maybe some kind of level design. I'm not too sure, but
layout maybe.
Yeah, layout.
But then again, it won't, because the tools are still going to be created. And unless it's like completely procedural, you still have artists in the mix doing layout stuff. So
yeah.
I wonder, but yeah, go on. Sorry to interrupt. I just, yeah.
That's fine. I think the likelihood of it creating like a large number of new jobs is pretty high. The likelihood of it eliminating pre-existing jobs is lower. So I don't think it's anything that someone should be like actively against, you know?
Yeah, I don't either. I think I'm with you. Seeing it from the industry perspective too. I don't see it killing too many jobs. I see it creating more jobs than we can imagine, and the applications to so many different industries. People always want to focus on like entertainment. They want to focus on, you know, on film, on movies, on stuff, and I do too, man. I love it. I want to work on film. I do, but at the same time, like I work on projects that, like, you know, they actually end up in real things. Or they end up in people's bodies, like the medical stuff, or the, you know, social stuff, or industrial stuff. It's incredible. Like when I first started this current gig that I have, about 14 years ago now, I worked with probably the best Maya artist I've ever met in my life. This guy taught me his whole workflow. Was able to start cutting out 5 shots a day. It was incredible. And he would tell me, he's like the 3D art space, or 3D, you know, applications of 3D art are like this wide, and entertainment is like here. This is the sexy stuff over here. This is like the money.
Yeah. So
look outside that and realize that these tools, especially like Blender, I'm starting to see like people in you know, in my company picking it up all over the place. It opens the door for artists into so many different industries. So you can be an artist and not, you know, work on all the sexy stuff that you get bragging rights for. And I mean, I get it. Come on, man. Like, we all want bragging rights. We do. We want to go on like Facebook or Instagram and go, I worked on this movie. We all do, right? It's just nature. But like, I've been able to, you know, build up a decent 401k and stuff just doing industrial stuff. So I think these tools are opening up these different industries to realizing, wow, we can use artists.
I think for the film industry especially, I mean, it depends on the company. They're not that interested in efficiency when it comes to when it comes to hiring people.
You know,
if you can make a job out of something, they've made a job out of it. So I wouldn't be worried about jobs disappearing. And you can see that when you look at the credits of visual effects houses in films. It's just, it goes on and on and on. And I know it takes a lot of effort to make those shots, but you sit there and you think, that many people? Wow, that's pretty crazy.
Are there still runners?
Yeah,
there's so much digital delivery now, but I wonder if there's still runners.
There are still runners. That's one of the ways, one of the easier ways to get in, I think. Yeah. They have runner programs that you can apply for every year, I think.
Would that these days just be, oh, I've got the hard drive with 100 terabytes of footage on it?
The problem with the runner thing is that it's still nepotistic. Heavily nepotistic. It's like, okay, well, we have these positions and we say that we'll only apply some every year, but I think they all get used up by people that know each other. And let's face it, if you've got a company that, like, one of their prime directives is hiring as many people as you can, then all those slots are going to get filled up with friends and family.
I mean, to make a film, it really is a group collaborative effort, and you're gonna want to hire, if you're a showrunner, you're gonna want to hire people that you know you get along with, right? You don't want to bring in the jerks. You don't want to bring in the people, you know, the trolls that are out there with that mentality, like, I'm better than you, you know, blah, 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 whatever. Like, you don't want to work with that kind of jerk attitude, right? So like, I don't, you know, a film is so collaborative. It doesn't get made unless people are on set and can work with each other and can be professional and agree with each other, right? So like, it's a different type of industry because those projects are so, like, they rely so heavily on personality management.
in some ways, if you're working on a project, you're going to want to hire people you get on well with, and that's important, right? Like this idea of culture. And you hear that word thrown a lot now, especially with like Silicon Valley, and it's like, oh, the culture of this company, the culture of that company. But I've heard it like sort of turned in some ways in that you don't necessarily want to only hire people who fit into your culture. Like you want outside opinions. You don't want to form echo chambers, and so that's also important to think about. But in the context of attitude, and I say this prefacing like I don't think there's like absolutely obviously nothing wrong with the job of a runner. There's nothing I don't think wrong with doing unpaid work, and that's controversial if you have the right attitude. Because if you're working for somebody or with somebody, and there's a difference, and you're working on a project that you self-selected to form part in, and it's unpaid, but you are in some ways crafting your own value out of it by what you're learning, or the connections that you're making, or the vanity metric of having your name on the project, or whatever. And if you're, just as we've been discussing today, sort of selective and cognizant of these things, then you can extract value for yourself out of this. Hi, Sharon. And that's important, right? So I think in life, in general, the gist of this is like the attitude is important. Whether that attitude is, I'm going to sit down and think about how I'm going to tackle this project so that when I go about working on this project, I can do it in a way that is efficient. Efficiency here defined as you're not going to run into a million roadblocks because you've thought about the potential roadblocks. Then that's one way of having what I think is a good attitude, right? And then when it gets to the point of reaching that roadblock, seeing it as a challenge, not as sort of a brick wall, is another way of attitude. Or whether you're thinking about using geometry nodes or not, and thinking about, okay, maybe I don't get this, but I don't really need it because there's tools that will supplement this information, right? So it's all about attitude.
Well, I was going to just ask, how are you doing, Charan?
Just woke up.
Oh,
I thought I'll be on time, but the power went off, and that my system doesn't work if power isn't there. So yeah, and I was like, okay, let me just take a quick nap, and it just took 3 hours to wake up.
Yeah.
Any good dreams?
Oh yeah, it was like I had no dreams, which is good. Like it's a deep sleep.
Oh, good.
It's weird when I say like I had no dreams, which basically means I don't remember them, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from what I've read, you do always have dreams. You just don't remember them.
I get quite happy when I remember them. I know that it's like kind of either the going in or coming out phase of a deep sleep, but I try and hold on to them as soon as I wake up. If I'm woken up abruptly, then I remember them much easier because it's like, okay, that's just happened. Now it's there. I try and like reconstruct it visually in my mind. I'm like, okay, we captured it. And then when I lucid dream, I'm like, okay, well, I've got about 30 seconds before I wake up because I know that only happens when it's beginning the process of waking up. So that's always interesting. Like I've been in a car and then I'll just start going crazy because I know I've only got a little bit of time before I'm back into the real world. So,
feels like Inception in a way, because you're kind of like I lucid dream, I feel like fairly often relative to friends that I've discussed this with who don't. And so whenever I do, I'm just like, uh-oh, it's happening. And I start hearing, no, in the back of my head, I'm like, I'm going to wake up. And then I wake up and I'm like, damn it, I lost it. But it's always this really weird moment where I'm kind of in the know about this phenomenon that I'm experiencing. Very cool.
Have you ever tried testing the limits? Because I've done it once where I was on like a kind of railway track. There was like a bridge and there was gravel in between the lines. And I just remember I began realizing that I was in a dream. So I was like, okay, let's see how much detail, like how far this goes. So I remember like getting down on the ground, looking at the gravel, like seeing how, like just what it would do. And it's just all there, like all the tiny minuscule stones and that. And I just kind of remember having a visual about that and thinking, wow, it's crazy how your mind just like fills in everything. Really nice.
Right? Yeah,
I've tied my shoelaces. That was my gravel moment where I was like, wait a minute. What?
Okay.
And then I, for some reason, given this world of freedom,
that surprising moment in the dream, like what just happened, kind of thing, happens quite a lot for me. It's like my dreams are a little bit more like I have a lot of people in my dreams. So they're like at least 4 stories running at the same time, and everything has
Whoa.
its own detail, and I can still remember it.
Mhm.
So what happens is I'll be talking to this person. Somehow I becomes that person and acts as that person and go on with the story. It's so weird, like how it just happens. Like I'll be seeing someone talking about something, and when they try to explain what is happening, I'll be the person who is living it. I was like, oh my god, this is so weird. And it'll be like, okay, this is not me. So what just happened? Like what?
That's
That
interesting.
moment happens a lot for me. Yeah.
That sounds kind of empathetic, like of your mind, just kind of like jumping spaces. I was actually speaking to a friend about this, I think yesterday. My mind does something weird when it comes to having conversations with people in dreams, because I think like a lot of the time your like insecurities might manifest, like you're having an argument with someone, they'll say something that you don't want to hear and stuff. It doesn't really happen with me, like, because I've had arguments with like family members and friends in dreams, and when I say something, because I don't know how they'll respond, they just stand there like this, like there'll be no response, and I get confused in the dream because I'm like, okay, why aren't they talking? And then like I kind of realized looking back on it afterwards, and it's happened more than once, I don't know what they would say, so my brain just doesn't fill in the gap. It's just like, and it's very unnerving. It's very weird.
Wow.
Stoic.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and sometimes it's so weird, like how actually like people, like if I know this person already, and when I'm talking to them in the dreams, I sense what they're gonna say, like exactly. Like for example, imagine, okay, if I'm going to talk to a mentor or something, or like the person who I look up to, when I'm low, when they're trying to motivate me, I can actually get motivated by what the person is saying inside my brain. That's how powerful like the imagination, or like the subconscious mind is. Everything basically. It's not like they're inside your dream. It's like what you want to hear, so you're just hearing it.
Yeah.
But, like
Yeah.
I just feel it's so weird. Like it's so real how like how your mind works. And yeah, I don't know. Like it happened so many times. Like when I'm just trying to talk to a person, when I was like, oh no, okay, I'm just kind of confused, and they will really say sentences in my dream, like which actually motivates me. And
Wow.
when I woke up, I'm like, okay, let's do this.
It always fascinates me how creative your subconscious can be in like building environments, because it's just like it's really out of this world stuff. Like if you ever like kind of pay attention and remember what the worlds look like, because it's like, I don't know, buildings that are kind of going like into mountains and like weird structures going everywhere, and you're like you've never
Like
seen
deep
anything.
dream.
Yeah, it's like you've never seen anything like that in real life, but your mind's just kind of
Yeah.
like putting it together. Interiors look all like strange and really disproportionate to like what they would be in real life, and you're like, wouldn't it be fascinating if you could just genuinely just enter that on command and explore? It'd probably be more interesting than looking around real life. That's why I really
A
wish we
dreaming
could
machine.
actually record dreams or our like perspective in dreams, because that would be amazing.
Well, in some ways we have, but
Yeah.
it's really muddled. And if you actually look at the footage of the, because I might butcher this, but for some time studied neuroscience, and so like there's actual footage that we've taken of like what's going on in people's brains while they're dreaming or while they're in this state, and to some degree like formed images, really muddled of that. But that's part of the reason why, to me, like Google's Deep Dream, I think it's called, and these other sort of algorithmic, generative art projects are so exciting, because I look at it and I go, oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I've definitely, like, that is, 3 seconds after my brain shuts down, I'm just like doing these nebulas in my head right before I jump into the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like Charan said, like the whole, is it confirmation or affirmation bias or both, of just being like, it's actually more like deja vu, right? Just like, oh, that is something that this person would say. Like, did that even happen? When the dreams are so realistic to the point where you wake up and you're like, either thank God that was just a dream, or damn, that was just a dream. I remember when I was like 4, I had recurring dreams, and maybe this like speaks so much of my devotions, but I had recurring dreams that I had this one like Spider-Man figurine. And at the end of the dream, I would always drop it like underneath my bed, and I would wake up so often and look for it, and it was never there.
Yeah.
And so I think early on in
Yeah.
life, I learned that we
Yeah.
don't always get what we want.
I used to
Yeah.
like literally live in Hogwarts in my dreams, basically, until I
man.
was 10. And then I realized, okay, it's all.
Darn.
It's just J.K. Rowling.
But I think the subject of empathy there is really interesting because even in waking life, I've had moments where I've had deja vu. And for those of you that don't know, I believe that deja vu is just a process in your brain that your brain's like shut down and is kickstarting back up, and it's just bringing you back up to speed on what happened while it was shutting off or like shutting down. And so that's why you're like, wait a minute, I've seen this before. But it's just like a process in your brain, and whether or not that's like ultimately true, I don't think we'll know. But just the idea of being like of what Charan was saying earlier is like, I think this person would say this, that, or the other. Or in Curtis's case, like, I don't know what this person would say in this situation. And the ability to fill that in, like, I've definitely been in situations where I've had massive deja vu moments. Holy crap, I know everything that everybody is about to say right now, and you're going to do this thing and this, that, and the other. And it's I don't know. I think personally, I'm somebody who obviously like really enjoys having friendships and being really close with people. That's just how I've been, and so that's only ever happened to me with people who I'm very, very close with, where I'm just like, I think the last 4 sentences you just said, I already knew you were going to say in some way, and so it was really exciting.
I mean, I'm very close to a few of my friends that I literally, like, before they say the sentence, I'll say it along with them sometimes, just to say, like, yeah, I do know what you're going to say this time. Like, when I'm just talking to them, they'll be like, what the heck? Like, everyone is trying to do more point distribution stuff, and me and Aaron are like, okay, what else can we do other than point distribution at this point? Because like, basically when they're trying to do shaders, most of the people will be like, okay, let's do vector displacement, and people like Gabe, they'll be like, okay, let's actually create a render engine from scratch.
Yeah, I know.
So like pushing the limits, and pushing the limits. And I was trying to do mostly procedural animation, and like, I did this cherry blossom thing recently. Like, I had no idea that was possible without force field. There was no force field, and it was really amazing. But I do want to see the pipeline where you can actually add physics inside the nodes and control all the values and parameters within it. And the other thing which I'm waiting in geometry nodes is actual modeling other than point distribution, like generating points, which actually they're working on it. Like, next we are gonna get curves, curve section and geometry nodes where you can actually add curves, smoothing, or all the cool stuff. That's when I realized, okay, then I can actually make procedural cables, cable generator, like pipes, procedural pipes. Oh my god, pipes are so hard to make. Like, if you know the points where, like, the endpoints, you can basically add 2 different joints which basically connect the pipes, and you can do some procedural pipes generation based upon the building and just scatter over them using point distribution. I had this really cool idea, but then I'm just waiting for more nodes.
I've thought about jumping in, and I'm like, and creating tools and things in there, and I'm like, I don't. It's gonna change. It's gonna change in the next iteration, and I'm like, anything I do, I was like, it's so like it's being developed so quickly that there's no baseline.
Part of the fun in that, though, is being able to take part in the conversations of where it's going. I think that's what's exciting about tools like Discord, applications like Clubhouse, like what's happening in Twitter right now. Not to bring it back to NFTs, but like being in the moment where we are all obviously in situations in which we can have a device on which to run Discord, internet connection on which to have this conversation, in which, like, you are watching this conversation presumably on your phone or on your computer or whatever. You can connect with us, you can drop a comment, you can subscribe if you haven't already, and you can keep up with us and also like join in on the conversations that we're being a part of. It's kind of, we can steer the ship wherever we want. And so, like, people like Aaron, people like Charan, who are like working on tools already, even though things will change, I are part of the drivers of the excitement behind this, and the,
Yeah.
the crafters of the future of where this will go and like what happens and what doesn't happen. We're all just beta testing life, man.
The other thing that's happening right now is like, I mean, my system is so, I would say, like not in the condition of actually working because it needs power supply continuously to run. Like the battery's always at 0 and I have to change the battery because it's dead at this point. Because I'm living in a village, I have no idea when the current is gonna cut off. Basically, I can't work continuously for like 2 to 3 hours, like with full concentration, because I'm scared like my power will cut off and the whole progress is gone.
Can you order a battery backup? Or
Yeah,
generator?
and it's gonna take a long time. Yeah. I mean, there is one. Like, unfortunately, this socket doesn't have it, and
Oh,
every
wow.
other sockets are filled in. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the person is coming tomorrow to fix that because I did order a new PC, like which I'm really excited for. Like that's gonna speed up my process and step up the gear a lot. Like
Yeah, I saw
right
that.
now I'm
It's
using
great.
1050 Ti, and I ordered a 3060, so it's going to be like the big top trends now. It's like, oh my god, it's 30 series. I have never worked with RTX before. Like I'm getting, like there was only one piece in India at that point when I ordered, so I was very very lucky. Obviously, the person who's selling it just trying to make money at this point.
Yes.
Like RTX, god, the rates are so high. Like once I get it, I think it'll actually speed up my workflow. It'll actually speed up my production rate, because I had like 7 to 8 videos already planned and scripts are already ready right now. So all I need is just a PC which can do everything at the same time, like record, talk, and everything.
Yeah,
So
that
yeah.
card is going to help. I couldn't
Yeah.
get a 30 series card. I just opted for, I just put the money down on a Threadripper. So I got the Threadripper and I'm still
Oh,
waiting
wow,
on
yeah.
I'm waiting on a PSU and I'm
Yeah.
waiting on a power supply and the RAM to come in.
The Threadripper is so good, like with the number of threads. Oh my god, 64.
I'm
Damn.
going to have 64 threads. That's insane.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to go for the 128, but the single core clock is quite a bit slower. So I thought like the one in between the 3960 and the 3990. So the 3970 is kind of that sweet spot because the clock speed is still good,
Yeah.
and you're getting like 64 threads. So 32 cores, 64 threads. It's insane. I was watching like videos on people doing CPU rendering, and I'm like, yep, that's
Yes.
where I'm going.
No
Or
longer
Yeah,
do
I
you
was
have to
like-
worry about your scene being too big.
yeah, I don't have to worry
Yes.
about that now. I'm not going to worry because I'm going to have mostly CPU rendering for now. I'm going to rip I have a 1070 GTX 1070. I'm going to rip that out of the old machine and put that in the new one just for the time being, so I still have a decent graphics card. And I got to say, like I was using Eevee to render, and the time to first pixel in 2.92 in Blender is so much faster. I'm getting I'm getting faster renders in Eevee because of the optimizations that they made. I think it's because of the optimization. So they did some work under the hood to like make that multi-threaded prep time on the front end.
Mhm.
And I read about it, and it's in like glossed over in so many different videos out there. But it's such a big deal because it's actually creating a much faster render time now. It's awesome.
So even Cycles is getting lots of improvements, and
Mhm.
like they're trying to like push right now we have the good tools, but we need more performance.
Yep.
Because that's what production environments need. And even the alpha versions are very stable. Before, if I just change the geometry nodes, it just crashes. And now it's actually like faster. Just using modifiers is better. Sometimes the combinations is better. Sometimes just using it under the whole thread is more better. And it's just so inconsistent. But then I think they're going to fix it, because sometimes I just feel the other add-ons that are made, like Swerchalk and some like Swerchalk Sorcar or the other procedural modeling tools are more faster than geometry nodes, because
Mhm.
they do want performance. But yeah, if other tools that are like add-ons, which are mostly built with Python and C++, are faster than the one which is inbuilt in Python, which comes with Python, should be even faster, right? So it's just right now, I think they're just getting more nodes so people can work with, and then slowly they'll fix the performance issues, which is completely understandable.
Mhm.
And we are getting spreadsheets, right? Like that's very, very nice. yeah, what would I see with numbers and what would I understand? But then I actually see like what values are going to change when I just control this one particular slider. Like it's just chain of values, and I can just keep like, okay, even this is getting affected, so I can make a driver to make this one consistent, and we basically constrain everything. And the next one thing which I really want is like a driver viewer, like which value is driving which, like a node editor type thingy. That's all I ask for. I don't want anything else.
Maya had the connection editor, and it was the coolest thing, because you could see like where your connections are going. Like you could have anything drive anything based on just having the connection editor. It was such a great tool.
That would solve that problem
Like-
I was having.
Yeah, it would.
Linking everything together.
Yeah, because by the end of the whole thing, you will have like one attribute that controls like so many things. Like that's what procedural things do. One slider basically control like 10 values, and I really want to see how many values are controlled by which variable. And yeah, it's kind of hard at this point. But then I think like, cause when you're making it, like, okay, this value is controlled by this because you're making it. But when you're giving it to someone else to check out, like people won't understand, because there'll be like about 10 to 15 drivers by the end of a project, and 10 to 15 drivers, sometimes which involves Python. Oh my god, it's just so messy. Like we need like an easier way to visualize drivers.
Yeah, visualization is key, especially for newer learners. And for those of us that don't know, because I saw the announcement and I glossed over the screenshots. But as soon as I read the word spreadsheets, I won't lie. I was talking about attitude earlier. My attitude towards the word spreadsheets is of this. Ugh!
I know.
So, for those of us that don't know, because you seem hyped, Charan, what does this bring to the table? Because for me, a spreadsheet is just a document I want to stay out of if I can. But that again, is just because of my bad attitude towards learning how to use them. So how would you use them?
Like if you know Houdini, like 90% of the people will be like, okay, let's look at the spreadsheet to see what variables are basically controlled by, I mean, like, what values are changing when you just move this one particular slider. Like right now, what I am working mostly is like using attributes and just pushing the limits of it. Like I don't know how many number of attributes I can have at one point of time. Like, at this particular instance, I don't know the number of, like, the maximum number of attributes I need and I want. Like, the Blender can handle without like, like lagging. But yeah, if it's still lagging, it should not crash. It should be like, okay, maximum limit is reached. So in the attribute, like spreadsheets or attribute viewer, that's what I would call it, spreadsheets. You can see all the attributes and you can filter them based on which, for example, let's say this one parameter and how many attributes it's basically affecting. And you can basically add constraints to it. Like, and you can just say, okay, let's select this one particular row. I think, right, like in spreadsheets, just like how you can select one complete row and just add incremental values to the whole thing. Or like, add like, let's add 1 to first row, or like, we can basically select few points based on the attributes, like let's say the corner points. So there'll be this one attribute which you can see in the attribute viewer. Okay, these 4 points are like, these 10 points are just the boundaries. So you can basically select them and make it to, like, you can save it as a new attribute, and you can basically influence them with other procedural things, and you can actually see them like filtering things, and it's a lot like filtering. Basically spreadsheets are really good for
great.
people don't understand, like, okay, it's just numbers. That's what I was thinking, right? Like, but getting into it, which actually made more sense to me, to be honest. Like, I was looking at Houdini tutorials to get inspiration for to do something with geometry nodes. Like Rohan Dalve released this new UI course recently. The trailer for the course basically inspired me to make my latest gear one. I think it's in work in progress or feedback. I made this gear looking thing, which was completely inspired by his UI course.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy, like, I watched the trailer because, I was like, okay, why can't I make this with attributes? But it is still using like the whole shader workflow, like, attributes at this point, because I'm just viewing the whole, or like masking everything using blacks and whites in my heads. But it's like we have this one selection thing, right? Like checker deselect, like under the pie menu, like checker deselect or like boundaries.
checker. Yep.
Just like so we have this thing in Houdini. I forgot the node, which basically select few points alternatively, like 3 points, 1 gap, 3 points, 1 gap, 3 points, 1 gap, like an array selection. It's like selection is just a boolean, like is it's selected or not, right?
Yep.
So I want this one node where we basically can give the condition and just selects it. Like if it is a boundary, okay, let's just select the boundaries. So other than that, or else right now what I have to do is basically think like, okay, how can I get a mask only surrounding these points so that it just influences it. Other than like, and it's really hard for people who don't know shaders, right? Like, because Erin is good with shaders, he can just use attribute workflow just by changing the render engine to cycles and just viewing the attribute, which helps a lot. That's how I'm. And for the persons who don't know how to use shaders, like procedural shading, like to that level, you can't mask out things easily. Like you can basically, because everything is point based, number of points basically gives you the resolution of the whole mesh or like the whole points. It's really hard for people who are not into shading. Like it's really hard. Like so, but I want, like, I just don't want it to be this way because all the attributes are just blacks and whites at this point, or it's like a color data. But I want it to be like just point selection, which spreadsheets gives a lot of control with, right? So you can see all the points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like in Houdini, you can basically see the numbers of the points as well, like the indices. And you can basically select 1 to 10. Like, for example, the point numbers you want to select, you can do like modulo 2. So, all the even number of points will basically select, which is basically checkers. Like, because it's continuous numbers, it's checker deselect. Like, just select the even numbers, even
modulo.
points. So, it's like modulo 2, right? Like, modulo 2 basically gives you 1 and 0 for alternative numbers. Like, if it's odd, it's going to give you 1. If it is even, it's going to give you 0 because 2 mod 2 is 0 and 3 mod 2 is 1, right?
Yeah.
So you can basically do all this math and basically, exactly. If you do modulo 3, what happens? It'll leave you 2 gaps and give you 1 black. Basically, I'm just giving you more examples how you can use spreadsheets and all the numbers and the flow of vertices, which you can basically get using spreadsheets. You can more visualize it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just
I'm
trying
looking forward to your tutorial on this.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I was saying before in understanding the root of 3D kind of at the molecular level. Like the spreadsheet lets you see the molecules. That's basically what it is. Like when you're an artist and you're playing with clay and you want to get in and see the molecular structure, go into the spreadsheet because that's the representation of all the data in your scene. And from there, once you can start, it's like seeing the Matrix. Like once Neo could see the Matrix, what happened? Like he turned into, Ted 2. Like he was just, it was incredible. So like you want that control, and the spreadsheet gives you that control. So like in Houdini, you can see like every point has a point ID, and then you can see like across the spreadsheet all the different attributes you can give the thing. You can give a point any attribute you want, and then you can like use it programmatically to call in whatever you want and operate on those points and do whatever you want. It's freedom.
Yeah.
But it comes at the cost of staring at it, basically the 3D version of Excel. And Arturo, do your thing.
What was that, Ellie?
Yes, Ellie's got it. Ellie got it.
Hit that like button. Do it. I dare you.
There you go.
There we go.
That's it.
Perfect.
Just in case the reverse psychology,
Yes,
we've
nice.
also got to add I dare you not to, so we can capture everyone.
Oh yes, we have to get the contrarians. I dare you not to.
Yeah.
I bet you won't hit that like button.
Yeah. Well,
And if for some reason you didn't like this, make sure you hit that dislike button twice. Really dislike it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just to
twice.
assert your dominance.
Yeah.
Right.